Imagine this. You're 5 years old, and the only language you know how to speak is English. It's the language that you sing your songs in, you read your books in, and it's the language that your family and your friends speak. And then suddenly you show up on your first day of school, and your teacher starts to speak to you in French. On top of this, she then asks you to learn how to read, write, and speak in this unfamiliar language. Well, this was the same problem occurring in Uganda prior to 2007. However, in 2007, the Ministry of Education and Sports implemented the local language policy under thematic curriculum in order to rapidly improve literacy rates by presenting information in a familiar language to learners. But despite these reforms being in place, the literacy rate in Uganda did not significantly improve. In 2007, the year the local language policy was implemented, the literacy rate was 45.5. 8 years later, in 2015, the literacy rate had only grown to 60.2. So my research sought to examine why have literacy rates not significantly improved in lower Ugandan primary education despite the 2007 local language policy. I examined two key variables, the supply of local language textbooks and the supply of local language teacher guidebooks, which are instructional aids provided for teachers to help them prepare and implement their lesson plans. What I found was that urban schools, who typically have a diverse population, opt out of the local language policy because there is no one single local language. However, rural schools, there's a much easier time finding one single local language, so they typically implement the local language policy. Interestingly, though, urban schools outperform rural schools in literacy in English by the end of the primary education cycle by 25% on average. This indicates that the local language policy in rural schools is not producing its intended goal of rapidly improving literacy. In regard to the supply of textbooks, I found that English textbooks significantly outnumber local language textbooks, despite a guiding pillar of thematic curriculum being the use of a familiar language. In fact, English textbooks outnumber local language textbooks by 1.7 million on average between the years 2012 to 2016. I found similar findings in regard to the supply of teacher guidebooks. Between 2013 and 2017, English teacher guidebooks outnumbered local language guidebooks by 43,000 on average. My findings were also corroborated in a report by the United States Agency for International Development, where they found that only 12% of teachers had an appropriate teacher guide in the language of instruction. Thus, I concluded that the implementation of the local language policy remains a significant barrier to its own success. My analysis demonstrates that schools who opt out of the local language policies and typically have a greater supply of learning materials perform better in literacy, whereas schools who implement the local language policy and have a lower supply of learning materials, rural schools, perform worse in literacy. So I recommend that the number of local language textbooks and teacher guidebooks be increased. In addition, I build my recommendations off of those given by the United States Agency for International Development when I say there needs to be a greater and more direct link between the textbooks and guidebooks between teachers and students. If properly reformed, this policy has the ability to rapidly improve literacy rates. This is important because we know increased literacy rates are correlated with a student completing their primary cycle. And when students complete a primary cycle, they are more likely to move on to the secondary cycle. And students who finish both their primary and secondary cycle typically have a more prosperous life in the long run. But thus, by doing so, we are providing Ugandans with the opportunity to create a more prosperous Uganda. Thank you.